is time to engage. Welcome to the second quarantine episode of Trek It or Wreck It, and the final episode for Picard. Episode 10. Oh man, we have an entire season to talk about, but specifically we're going to dive into the details of this season, of this episode first, and then go into the season. I would like to start by saying, God, spoiler alert, big time, because we're going to get directly into characters who have died, and then maybe not so died. So that'll be interesting to to unpack today. Vanya, Powys, thank you for joining me digitally again. This social distancing is working out without actually missing each other.
Thank you. By the way, let me just quickly say, it's been wonderful being a guest this season.
Oh, thank you, Powys.
And I've enjoyed the debates, the lively debates. So
it's been great having you.
So thank you.
Cool. Well, let's get into the things. I'm thinking we should really divide this into things we like or are hard not to like, things we do not like, things that are derivative, and questions that are left. So I want to start with the good news. Let's start with the things we liked. I think the thematic arcs of this season and the way they come to an end in this episode, I found them beautiful. Vanya, what were your thoughts on the themes?
I felt like they all did kind of tie up quite nicely. We've been talking about a lot of the philosophy behind being human and sacrifice and what that means, and it carried through pretty well all the way to the end, and from like the books that Rios is reading to like the actual sacrifice that Picard was making, and and tied in with Data's original sacrifice, it all made sense to me.
How about you, Powys? How did you feel about the themes when it was all done?
I tell you something. I felt that it was the final episode was basically Rise of Skywalker.
Interesting.
Every single thing about it was Rise of Skywalker. And I'm going to tell you why. And I realized this when I watched it again last night. You got a battle on the planet down below. You got a battle up in space. You got an SOS that's sent out, and you have a fleet coming to the rescue. Right? You've got a female heroine on the ground. She gets a voice from a legacy character sort of spurring her on. You have two former enemies teaming up to fight. So you got Elnor and you got the Romulan guy to fight the bad dudes. You got a beam blasting up into space. You got the Emperor and Rise of Skywalker. You got the beam blasting into space with Soji. Right? You got a legacy hero who dies. And you have the young heroine who calls herself Soji Picard. No, she doesn't do that. But then you also have that blink or you'll miss it sort of same-sex scene.
Yeah.
Which is just the Rise of Skywalker, you got the same thing, and in this you have the same thing, but it's so fleeting that you're like, couldn't you have fleshed this out a little bit more? Couldn't it be something that's tangible as opposed to, oh look, there it is.
Yeah.
If you're going to do a same-sex scene, make it real, make it something tangible. I mean, I don't think Raffi and Seven of Nine have been in the same room for longer than 10 seconds. When did that happen?
I'm not ready to talk about that. I wasn't ready to talk
Yeah,
about that.
let's get to that. Let's get to that part in a bit, because I have a whole derivative section I'd like to discuss, and Rise of Skywalker was on my list as well, right down to like geometric, broken down hulks on the shore where people are trying to get into them for stuff that's inside them. There's a lot of.
That's interesting.
There's a lot of.
Basically, the script of Rise of Skywalker.
I know.
That's what they use.
And I feel like there's a certain danger that happens when you're writing something by committee, and there's an element to the bibs and bobs, the little story points here and there that can feel rounded out. But I think the thematic arc of this show that was about what makes a human, what makes a person, and the choice to make the title character, spoiler alert, into the kind of person who was being subjugated and being essentially wiped out of existence at the beginning of this show, and now Picard's a synth. is a fascinating thematic journey to land on. The idea of sacrifice is interesting, and I'd like to talk about a little bit later about how that might be a little bit undermined by what happened in this episode. But the other things that I really loved about it, Isa Briones is a musical theater actor. And she was in Hamilton and the Tourco, so she has an incredible voice and gets to bring us blue skies. And
I like that.
I would love to hear what you guys feel about how Data's daughter, as we like to call her, even though she's just one of Data's colony.
Well, I love her. She's my favorite character. She still is. She's still compelling. I still want to see her journey. I think she's terrific. This is her show.
Vanya?
I thought that was a nice touch that she was able to sing that song, which sent Data off. That's really, I'm wondering, like, how that was, I wonder how that was brought about, like, whose idea that was to...
Well, apparently, it was something Kurtzman wanted to do. Believe it or not, a good idea from Kurtzman. Pretty weird. But then he didn't even execute. He didn't even execute it. He just mentioned it to Jeff Russo, who then told Issa about it, not realizing he was the first person to say anything. So,
yeah. It's funny that you say that, because when I was saying, I wonder how it happened, I knew Russo had something to do with it, because he's been on point the entire season.
This should be called Star Trek Russo.
Well, he seems to be the strongest creative.
I think Russo's beautiful.
Yeah.
He's on the ball. He's on point.
Now, of all the things that were beautiful and so hard not to love, the return of Data Hefner. I gotta say, him in his pimp smoking jacket, getting to wear the outfit in a monochrome version that he got to wear in All Good Things as he slowly, gracefully goes was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scene. I loved that, and I loved the mirror scene that happened before it where Picard got to finally have the closure that he never gets at the end of Nemesis. And that, to me, was the only reason this show needs to exist. The one thing, I could pull a short trek out of this entire season, and it would just be that scene between Brent Spiner and Patrick Stewart, because the emotion of what was happening there, even with all the peculiar de-aging, just was on fire. Vanya, did you enjoy that as much as I did?
Sorry, go ahead.
I cried. It got me. I cried. It was so beautiful. Every aspect of it, their discussion was so... Data, it brought me back to when Data, the episode with Lal Offspring, and, how he talked about wisdom, and how it comes from experience. And it just really showed in that scene. And then you have these two really great actors, they were like, it was just a playground for them, and they really got the job done. It was gorgeous. It was just, I don't know, and
it really was.
Poise?
That was my favorite. I should have led with that. That was my favorite part of the thing, of the whole episode. Finally, sort of getting to say goodbye to Data, and having a real sort of meaningful conversation. The two of them sitting down, Picard with his friend, his dear friend. And Data finally getting to age, as they literally say their goodbyes, they sort of have a service for him, and Data actually gets to age, and we feel like, okay, this is the way you say goodbye to Data. I deeply love that. That was my favorite part of the whole episode.
Yeah, I do feel like when you're saying goodbye to a character you love that much, squeezing it into the running time of one feature film does it a disservice. And so being able to find the time to let it breathe in a series where this character was born in a series, it's good to see him, it's good to say goodbye in a series. I feel like that made all the difference to me. one thing that I absolutely adored was that Romulans have not one, not three, but 5 planetary sterilization patterns just off the cuff available. I thought that was like the most Romulan thing that Commodore / General O could have possibly done. That made me so happy. How did you guys feel about getting to see a fleet of Romulans show up on Synth Homeworld? Vanya?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty badass. I think that one of the best things about the series, like this, inaugural series for Picard, is like the growth of Romulans in our minds. What we've got to see, we're so familiar with them, but now we're really familiar with what they're like, and seeing that was, I think, really cool. Like, I don't know, I was impressed by seeing their armada or whatever.
How about you, Poise? Romulan Armada, how'd you feel?
That's actually interesting. It's an interesting point is that we actually, have we seen any Vulcans in this show so far?
Just half of one.
Half one.
That's what I mean, which is really, really weird, because Vulcans have always been central to Star Trek. You know what I mean? I mean, there's humans, then there's Vulcans, and Vulcans have always shown up in pretty much every series.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sort of conspicuously absent from this series, which is a little odd. But that's fine. I'm glad they spent that time actually developing the Romulans more, because they were sort of a void. They were sort of vague in terms of what they did and how they lived and their culture. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, their main attribute was like treachery mixed with mystery, and that was what a Romulan is. And so to get to see not just the Zhat Vash and this central core of the Tal Shiar, but also Elnor and the Coat Milat and these different corners of Romulan society, I think was a really exciting thing to experience. And it felt like when you compare the way Picard as a series dealt with Romulans and the way Discovery as a first season dealt with the Klingons, man, one of these things is not like the other.
I feel like, I feel like they maybe learned something from that, and from how the Klingon situation was handled in Discovery, and I feel, I think they really did a great job of expanding something that we already knew. I feel like that's the way you use canon and make it brand new. Right?
I agree, absolutely. That's the cool thing about what they did with Romulans in this season. They certainly learned.
I would say the only flaw is the naming of Romulans is a difficult matter. The cats thing.
Right. I thought it was an unnecessary matter. Actually, the whole 3 names thing. I don't think you need that.
Guys, Jellicle Romulans are Jellicle Romulans, and that's all you need to know.
Well, because all they're trying to do is get to the Heaviside layer. That's why they brought that Armada.
What's actually interesting, and I appreciate, is that they didn't reimagine Romulans in terms of their look like they did with the Klingons. Aside from maybe the northern Romulans having a slight sort of thing on their head, it was like...
You know what? The interesting thing about that... The interesting thing about that, Poise, is that they managed to combine what Romulans looked like in the original series with what Romulans looked like in TNG, and kind of explain how there's a bit of a bump on these ones and not a bump on those ones, and did sort of the simpler version of what Enterprise did with Klingons and forehead ridges. And I feel like that's the way you smooth over canon inconsistencies that aren't because of bad storytelling, they're because of increased production value, increased budgets, and the Borg used to literally look like they had hoses coming out of zombies. And then they became something a bit more interesting, a bit less like you had glued a bunch of twigs to a square, and they have some production value. And so seeing the way the show has managed to fold in certain elements of that and evolve elements of that, I think is one of the strengths of this series.
For sure.
I think one of my favorite strengths is the Zheng He with Captain Riker in it. Guys, can we talk about that? And I don't want to just slag on the fact that it's a really lazy production design because it's just the Discovery Bridge. Let's talk about the good parts first. Vanya?
experience and wisdom, but still be himself, still be Will Riker that we love and be exciting and and a badass. And we know that character, so we know when he says something, he's gonna put his money where his mouth is, kind of thing. So I don't know. That was really excited to me, and it's like I didn't even really think about the ship. Just him saying he could be lying, and I would just be like, yeah, that is the most powerful ship. You know what I mean? Like I just love that character so much. He's arguably my favorite TNG character. Like I really, how I feel about.
Good Lord.
Well, right. But yeah, and so seeing him was
Data.
exciting and believable that he would, it's good that they wrote in that he was still an officer.
Yeah.
So at least they, I like when things at least aren't just said and they have a reason for being said and then they happen.
Yeah, when something is paid off in that way, even like Rios's soccer ball pays off in this episode. And things like that, when you're worried about the hands that a show is in, you feel like there's time being wasted here and there. But when you see things like this happen, you have a bit more faith, I'd say, in the way someone is running a show. Poise, how did you feel about Riker?
Here's my question with the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does Riker just sort of get a flagship like that? How do you, clearly there must have been a captain or an admiral on that ship before. It's like sort of the USS Indianapolis. It's like, okay, you guys doing anything? Oh, we're not doing anything. We got to deliver a bomb. Oh, well, can I have your ship? Captain, can you get off? I'm going to take over. Oh, what do you need it for? I got to do a thing with my friend. Oh, okay, here you go. Here's a ship. Just take off and do whatever you do.
What?
It just seems like, how does that work? You're off duty. How do you just suddenly get the flagship?
It's a question. It's a good question. It's a good question.
I thought you were talking about good things first.
Yeah, let's lay into the good things first. What did you like about having Riker show up in the most advanced ship Starfleet's ever made?
Having Riker show up. That's what I loved about Riker showing up. Because it does also tie back into all good things. Riker to the rescue, right? Riker's there to support his friend, right? His right-hand man. He comes guns blazing, ready to kick some ass, literally kick some ass. I love that he was there for Picard. But you sort of expected that he would be. I mean, come on. We expected that, there would be a fleet coming at any minute, right?
Well, I mean, you can certainly hope. It did not disappoint when it came to showing us a fleet. It's funny that it's been, 18 years since we've seen what Starfleet ships look like, and there's not a single Galaxy-class ship to be found. Excelsiors were in play, they were in play for like 100 years, but the Galaxy-class, I guess, just didn't cut the mustard because it's all new ships in this fleet.
But you know what was badass? Actually seeing, I wrote that down, actually seeing all those ships warp in above the planet. Just both the Romulan ships as well as the Federation just warping in. I was like, damn! That was just so badass visually. I'm like, damn, I was excited.
Well, that's interesting because I would like to get now to some parts that feel derivative. And I've got to say, this entire giant fleet of Federation ships meeting a giant fleet of bad guy ships just felt like this two-parter at the end of season 1 of Picard was taking notes from the two-parter at the beginning of Discovery, because this just felt like a redux of every visual effect from the Battle of the Binaries. Did you guys get deja vu, and were you as worried as I was as soon as it looked like Discovery's pilot? Vanya?
Yeah, I recognized it right away. I was like, in this day and age, when we see everything so close together, and we can so readily rewatch them, I feel like you need to be careful, especially when you're in the same property.
Yeah.
We don't have. It's not like we go a week without seeing the next. Well, in this case, we do, but then we can watch Discovery right now whenever we want. We don't have to wait till next season. To see it. We don't have to wait till it's in syndication to see reruns. You know what I mean? So it's just at our fingertips. So I feel like you have to be really careful not to make those missteps, especially when you're all from Star Trek.
Yeah, and to homage like the worst way a series of Star Trek has ever started. And the most recent derided way is an interesting choice. Poise, how did you feel? Did it seem familiar in that way?
Well, it felt familiar in terms of Rise of Skywalker. That familiar.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say it felt familiar, but more from a Star Wars perspective. I didn't actually think of Discovery when I was watching it. I was thinking more Star Wars.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of it for me was a sonic thing as well, because it's the same warp sound that they're using in Discovery that is not the warp sound that we've had for 50 years. So it's happening on so many different sensory levels that I'm like, oh my god, am I in Discovery? Flashbacks. Now, on the topic
I
of...
was thinking about that sound, sorry.
Oh,
I was
yeah?
thinking about that sound too.
Yeah.
It really resonated.
Yeah, I don't know if I like it. Maybe it's just a bit of PTSD. But one other element of Discovery visuals that I'm having a hard time getting past is this big old window on every ship. Because even the Romulan Warbird has a big old dumb Discovery window on the front of the ship. And the biggest, baddest, most Starfleet vessel ever made has the same big dumb window on the front. And it feels a bit like when a car manufacturer decides that they need to do a throwback to something. It's like, let's make a new Thunderbird or a Mustang that looks like an old Mustang. And I feel like this is a terrible design choice. Even if you explained it away, it's a terrible design choice. But do you guys feel like they're just throwing out elements of continuity by showing us the Discovery style of ship 150, 200 years after that ship was, or that design was even necessary? Vanya, what are your thoughts on these windows?
I mean, if they were really thinking like that, they were like, okay, let's just like try and tie everything in so it all across properties, it like across the shows in this property, it looks the same. I don't know that that's what is actually happening, but that would be pretty smart, I guess, so that we all kind of like get over it, that everything looks so different, because they went backwards and then made something more advanced, and now they're trying to be like, okay, it was always like that.
Yeah.
I guess that's fine, and that would be actually kind of smart. I don't know if that's the case. I do have a problem. The window, not only, like, the fact that Riker, like, he looked like he was by himself because he was on a bridge that was 3 football fields large. Like,
yep.
Discovery, where people can just hide on the bridge.
Yep.
There are a bunch of bits on there. I don't know how I feel about that.
I will say that over the years, Star Trek has, including the movies, has sort of modified the look of things ever so slightly and subtly. I mean, if you look at the original series versus the motion picture, for example, right? They retrofitted the Enterprise. I mean, it looks completely different from the TV Enterprise once you get to Star Trek the motion picture in '79. But we accept it. You know, we sort of accept these things. It's like, oh yeah, okay, you got a bigger budget. You can make these little tweaks, and just sort of, you know, people will grow to accept them, I suppose.
I mean, I guess some of us more than others.
That's true.
So I already mentioned that I found the first shot of Picard in this episode just was Rise of Skywalker, the hulking Death Star off the shore. But the other elements that I thought were very visually derivative, and I'd love to know if you guys agree, is from the beacon to open a portal with insurmountable reinforcements. It looked exactly like the one in the first Avengers movie.
There's always a beacon. Everybody does beacons these days. There's a big beam in the sky. There's a beacon. And stuff comes through.
Dangerous looking stuff, yeah. And then I found that the golem that was being made and then suddenly had a different consciousness in it was basically just Avengers Age of Ultron with Vision. Like, that just felt like it was a redux. And,
oh, interesting.
Right?
I didn't think of that.
And
okay,
then,
yeah.
And then we've been talking for the last couple of episodes about how this is starting to tread very much on Battlestar Galactica's all of this has happened before and all of this will happen again. And then as Narek is talking about his legend, he says, this is history which repeats itself.
Yes, I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is what we said said,
Yeah.
don't do this very thing, and then he said it, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
So
there.
falling back into that place, I will say about the Gollum thing, it did remind me that there's a part, I believe, in The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay that talks about the Golem, and it's connected to like the Jewish, like a story in Jewish culture. So I felt like, and that's Michael Chabon's like Pulitzer Prize winning book, and so I thought that was kind of neat to have that aspect in the show.
And yet, the use of the word golem I found interesting because in Dune, it's a Gola that is the type of being who is able to be cloned from just a little piece of him, and there's one in particular that's able to maintain his memories. So that I found interesting, but I also found it funny that several actors mispronounced it, naming him Gollum instead of a golem, which... Yeah, so I did find that pretty hilarious and like accidentally derivative. Did you guys find?
It did seem, just touching on the Gollum thing again, it did seem just purely sort of convenient, just to sort of dump Picard's consciousness in there.
Yep.
You know, I mean that's really the whole purpose of the thing. And I just wanted talking about the Gollum and speaking and Picard's death. It didn't feel like it was long enough to have any resonance. Right?
No.
Picard died, and it goes back to Into Darkness.
Yep.
Kirk dies for like 4 minutes, and then he comes back. And
Yeah,
okay.
it's a very similar thing, and I want to get into that when we get into dislike, because that is firmly in my dislike camp. But I'd like to also say that the Romulan warbirds with those big dumb discovery windows just looked like Cylon Raiders.
Sure, yeah.
It was alarming how derivative of the reboot Battlestar Galactica Cylon Raider that was.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with the connection to Battlestar Galactica, because it's like I talked so much about Battlestar Galactica when we talked about Discovery, you know, and now we're doing it again. I mean, it's such a popular property that, you know, one of the veterans of like writing and producing from TNG and Deep Space Nine is his, you know, baby, Ronald D. Moore, and so we're still doing it, you know? I just feel like if we're going to tell this synthetic story, like, you have to tell it differently. You have to break away a bit. Not to say that you can't have some similar themes about humanity, because I think that's really what, you know, anytime we talk about AI and, like, robots and androids, we're going to have, like, some things that are thematically the same, having to do with what's human, you know what I mean? Who's alive, you know? Are you real? All those questions. But I feel like it doesn't have to be exactly like everything that's happened before has happened, you know, is happening again.
Well,
like,
and I think one of the key elements that I'm observing on a meta level right now is when Ronald D. Moore wrote the pilot for Battlestar Galactica, he put a little page, a notice to reader on the front that was only meant for a few people, but it wound up getting Xeroxed for everyone. And it said, with this series, we intend nothing less than the complete reinvention of the science fiction genre. And I have got to say, it seems to have been successful, because everything is Battlestar Galactica in one shade or another, and Picard in several shades.
I just want to touch on that point. Last week we were speaking about how the show is very much Battlestar Galactica and Westworld, sort of smushed together with a sprinkling of Star Trek. The Orville, and you and I were speaking about this a few weeks ago when we were in, I think we were having coffee somewhere. The Orville is actually more brave for doing what it does, because it's so unlikely that you would create a show like that in the tone of something that's set, it sort of looks like a show from, let's say, the 90s, maybe. Everything post-Battlestar sort of looks like Battlestar, you know, once you get into sci-fi. And I think maybe we're a little bit fatigued of sort of dystopia, because we're actually literally living in a dystopian world right now. It's like we want to have something a bit more hopeful, like the Orville sort of offers.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that's a very clear choice that the Orville's making that is very bold by being so derivative deliberately homage paying at every turn. And
Right.
I think there is a lot of bravery in that choice. Vanya?
Sure, I guess there's bravery in making that, like, the boldness of being like, we're gonna be, like, kind of go back to 1987 when TNG started, and do a show like that in 2018 or whenever it started. I will say that in doing that, it's kind of genius, because then you have a much easier job to
Yep.
get done, because you can be so derivative and it makes people happy, and you know what I mean, like, and you don't have to really write new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
brave,
I'm
it's
also
brave and
hard-
it's easy.
I also feel like I'm the hardest critic of the Orville, like, in that regard. But yeah, so yeah, it is still bold. I'm not denying that there is still a bold choice about it, even though I do think it's much easier to accomplish.
Absolutely. Now, Poise,
I think when Star Wars came out in '77, one of the reasons for its success was because the world was in a shitty place. There were wars, there were all sorts of riots, there were race issues, and Star Wars came out and it was hopeful and it was bright and it went completely against the grain of what everybody else was sort of doing. And people wanted that because it's like, we're already living in a shitty existence. We have a global pandemic, man. We haven't seen one in 100 years. You got people dying left, right, and center. We got the world at war. It's like, we want to have something optimistic and hopeful about the future. We want that right now. Dystopia was great in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s. We want to see something that gives us a little bit more hope for the future.
I think you're right. And I think there are certain things in this show that manage to touch on hope. But instead of being a season of hope, it's a season of systemic darkness and heroes not being believed by the system, and then at the very end, some systemic bad choices are reversed, and now it's okay to be a synth. So that seemed like a super easy, an easy out at the end of it. But I'd like to talk about the things in this episode or season that we straight up disliked. And the very first thing that you've already mentioned, I think both of you, is that killing Picard and immediately reviving him. It undercuts any sense of emotional loss. And if there's no loss, why did they milk the crying and drinking together bits? Like, this episode tried to have its cake and eat it too in a way that I just felt cheated by. Vanya, did you? How about you, Poise?
Vanya? I didn't hear anything.
I didn't hear either. Oh, let me call her back.
Oh.
You can give me an answer there, Poise. What do you feel?
Yeah. Well, I felt the same way I felt when I saw Into Darkness. I felt, I was watching that in the theater, and I remember there was a woman crying behind me when Kirk died. And I was just thinking, this is just the Wrath of Khan. This is just a reverse of, and the fact that they hadn't spent that long together, Kirk and Spock, it didn't feel like it was earned. Whereas in Wrath of Khan, we know that Kirk and Spock, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, spent quite a long time, many years together. Whereas Kirk and Spock in Into Darkness has spent like maybe one movie together.
Yeah, they had pretty much just met.
Back in a second, it's like, well, oh, okay, what happened? Why? I think if they had brought Picard back next season, at least give it a little time to breathe. Give his death a little bit more resonance. Bring him back in the middle of the second season. And maybe have the first couple episodes next season be about Seven of Nine and somebody else,
Or even recognizing that the show is called Star Trek Picard, they could have just allowed him to be dead for a week. This is a show being drip-fed weekly, despite, I think, its clear design to be binged. And so the fact that he could have been killed one week and brought back the next week, sort of, they have the system built to give us a real resonant feeling of loss. And then this just failed to deliver that, and yet still spent 2 scenes with characters weeping and drinking together and feeling that loss, when in the other room, you know he's currently being revived into a bulletproof body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also felt that because it's characters, and it goes back to this thing where you have new characters weeping for a legacy character. You have characters that we've never seen before, crying over somebody who they pretty much just kind of met, right?
Yeah.
With the exception of Raffi. You know what I mean? It's. I think it would have been more earned if Riker was standing over Picard's body, right? Or anybody, Riker or even Troy, I think it would have had more resonance if it was one of those characters from TNG.
Yeah, I mean,
when he died.
For us as audience members, we've only seen a relationship between Elnor and Picard, or between Raffi and Picard, for 9 hours. That's the amount of buy-in we've got. Sure, you can tell us they've known each other for 14 years, but we haven't. And we're the people's emotions you're playing with now.
Precisely.
So in that scenario, you could have even told us Seven, who we've known longer, felt a deep connection to Picard, but they went out of their way to say they'd never met. So...
But you think Seven would have made a difference if she was crying over...
You know what? Because I have a connection with 7 of 9 that predates 9 episodes ago on Star Trek Picard, it would have more value to me if the show told me that they'd known each other for 20 years or 30 years. They met in the collective. And this show had the opportunity to build all that out however they wanted. And they chose to make it that there was no history between Picard and 7.
Right. I think the connection we'd mentioned in the past about them both being Borg and XB, I think her mourning Picard would have made sense, even though they didn't serve together or spend a lot of time together. I think from that standpoint, I think that would have made sense. That would have worked.
Yeah. I thought it was a weird choice when they did it halfway through the season, and it's a choice that did not pay off because we wound up not getting to enjoy them having a long-standing relationship. Her feeling that Picard's dead didn't actually pay off. It was she knew him for about as long as Rios did.
That's right. And also touching on the you and I have spoken offline about this. I do believe that Alton Inigo Soong is lore.
Yes.
AI.
Yeah, let's talk about how Alton Inigo, AI Soong, actually just seems to be a dude who actually wants to have his brain put into a robot.
Right.
Which is a fascinating zig when we were expecting them to zag with a guy who's named AI. Very strange choice.
It is strange, and I think it's going to be revealed either next season or in the last season that he's actually lore all along. Somehow. I don't know what he did, but somehow. Maybe lore put his consciousness into human form. I don't know. But they're going to find a way to explain that. Because there's no way that a scientist as large and renowned as Soong, it wouldn't be known that he had a biological son. Like one biological son. It's like, we don't know about Stephen Hawking.
I don't know. Right? We didn't know that Spock had one half-brother, one adopted sister. Like, there's a long history of not having any idea. We didn't know that there was...
Remember, Vulcans are enigmas. They don't speak. Their culture is very quiet. They don't reveal information unless it needs to be revealed. So I can see the Vulcan culture sort of protecting that information. Oh yeah, Spock's got a half-brother hiding over the thing. But humans, we would know. We got journalists and media. You would know that Soong had a son. You would know that.
I don't know. Not even Data had memories when he was found. Like, there's a decided lack of knowledge of what happened on the planet that the crystalline entity essentially destroyed. So I think it's entirely possible that some hidden away hermit didn't let anybody know he had a kid because nobody cared about a hidden away hermit.
Maybe.
I mean, I guess he would have had that kid about 60 years before now, meaning 30 years, about 30 years before Data was on the Enterprise, so about 10 to 15 years before Data was discovered.
10 to 15 years, okay, so he would have been, let's say, 50, 60, yeah, even that's kind of late.
I don't know.
Official insemination, who knows what he did. But I suppose it's plausible.
Yeah, oh, it totally tracks. This retcon son doesn't not track. It is curious that we've never heard of him before, and that AI also didn't mention anything about lore or B4, only Data.
That's true, he only mentioned Data.
Yeah.
Which is why he's got to be lore. I still think that dude's lore, and that guy's going to be the big bad. You know, this season, the big bads were the Romulans. Okay, we got them out of the way. Next season is going to be lore.
Well, I mean, the big bads were the evil interdimensional metal snake tentacles coming out of the sky.
Which is odd, because I actually didn't care about that.
No. They were not.
You know?
They were not established to be frightening. They were established to be dangerous,
Right.
and potentially able to do some damage. But they were a nothing burger. They were like they were a bit like the crystalline entity before you've seen it do anything.
Agreed. Although I was actually kind of terrified of that thing as a kid, the crystalline entity.
Yeah, man.
That thing was creepy as hell. Before the Borg, it was the Borg and then the crystalline entity. You know, that was number 1 and number 2.
So all the geometric and fractal things.
Yeah, I didn't like those at all. They make me scared.
Well, that makes sense. I keep trying to call Vanya, but I'm not getting her back. She's told me on Facebook that she's trying to get in, and maybe we should just finish without her because she's not sure when we'll get it back. So, Poyce, I would like you to tell me...
Should we pause and maybe...
No, this show is live, warts and all.
Okay.
So I want you to tell me what it was about Picard that was better than Discovery, or vice versa. Which series, let's even just give it first season, which first season is superior and why?
I think Picard's first season is superior. I didn't like the first season of Discovery at all. The second season really sort of ramped it up. They sort of heard, I think, a little bit of the criticisms, and they started making some changes, and brought in Pike, and the writing got really sort of cool. The Klingons they made modifications by season 2 that I was like, okay, yeah, I want to see more of this show, you know? But I think Picard season 1 is better than Discovery season 1, without question. That's my view.
Interesting. Now,
Which one? What do you prefer?
how about the pilot, the first 2 hours of Discovery? Did you, because you weren't here for Trek It or Wreck It, I'm curious what you thought of the first 2 hours of Discovery, because everyone's aware that I think it's the worst 2 hours of any series of Star Trek, and then the first 2 hours of Picard was somehow less satisfying. I'm curious.
Less satisfying?
Yeah, like the first 2 hours of Picard got us pretty much nowhere by the end of the first 2 hours because they had to stretch 3 hours from what was originally 2 hours worth of story.
Right.
Which of the two series do you think got off to the better start?
That's interesting. Okay, well, in terms of a better start, I think maybe Discovery. Like, if I'm not being biased, I think both of us probably have a little bit of bias because we recognize a character that we know in Picard.
Yeah.
Whereas Discovery were a whole cast of people we never met before. So probably Discovery, I think. If I'm being fair, I think probably Discovery. The first 2 episodes, I think maybe that probably got us somewhere a little faster.
Yeah.
Than the first 2 episodes of Picard. But I like the pacing a little bit better in the first 2. If you were to smush the 2 episodes of Picard 1 and 2 together, I think overall, I prefer that better.
Well,
Guess who's back?
There we go.
Technical quarantine. Suck it. We got this. Okay, so
Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. Technology, man, it makes our lives easier. So we were talking about the idea of killing Picard and then bringing him back in the same breath. And Vanya, did you feel like having a bunch of characters cry over him and then he pops up a robot? Did you think they were having their cake and eating it too, a bit too much for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Because I felt like, the show and the same thing happened with Discovery. They're always, these shows ask us a lot to be really familiarized with these characters who really, in some ways, mean nothing to us. Like Picard, we know him, right? So, yeah, he matters to us, but in a way, we kind of are like, who do you think you are, feeling things for him? Because we know him more,
Yeah.
And so I do feel like that, them doing that, and the fact that really they just killed, like, maybe arguably the most favorite character in Star Trek. I know he's there, but he's really not there anymore. He is an android now. He's a different person in some ways,
Well, this actually goes back to this idea of what the transporter does. Because here's the thing, when you consider the transporter accident that happened with Will Riker that created Thomas Riker, the fact that when you beam someone up somewhere and you dematerialize what he was or she was before and rematerialize a copy of that person, you are murdering someone every time you teleport anywhere.
Good Lord.
Because you're beaming a digital copy, right? Yeah.
Don't think about that,
That's
man.
how McCoy feels.
Right? So, do we think that what they've done with Picard is really any different than beaming someone somewhere when you think about it?
That's a good way to rationalize. Okay, I'm listening.
I agree with that. I just feel like it was really quick for us. Okay, so maybe if there was more time spent, but it was kind of like, okay, now he's in this. I guess that's just like beaming too.
Yeah, right?
But I do feel like there was like a mourning period that we watched his, like, the life that we've seen, we watched that die.
Yep.
In that moment. So I felt like, I don't know how, I'm conflicted about exactly how I feel about the fact that we watched Picard die.
Well, let's go back to that beautiful scene that happened in this episode between Picard and Data. When Picard's body is dead at that point, and Data exploded 18 years beforehand. That is a conversation happening between a simulacrum of Data from a cloned single positron and the engrams of Picard. It's two computers having a conversation. Does it make that scene less emotional when we think of it as two simulations talking?
No, so actually that makes me feel better about the end. When you put it like that, I feel better about the fact that Picard is still Picard.
Which I guess goes back to the themes of the show. What makes a person real?
Does that make the show tighter? I think so.
I think.
Well, touching on this, we spoke a little bit about this when Vanya was offline. I appreciate a lot of new things that are being done with the new Star Wars trilogy. One of the things that I think could have had more resonance was when Han Solo died.
Mm-hmm.
If somehow Leia or Luke or somebody who had a deeper connection to him was around at the time of his death.
Other than Chewbacca, to whom he owes a life debt.
Well, other than Chewbacca.
Who he's known longer than either Leia or Luke.
Well, hang on. Chewbacca, to be fair, he can't really express emotion in terms of words and stuff, right? So.
Wow, just because you don't speak Wookiee.
So, I'm just saying that at Picard's death, it would have been cool if Riker was there, or Troy, or, somebody who had that sort of connection to him. I think it would have added as opposed to these characters who have really not known him very long, right? For a couple of days, probably.
Some of them,
right?
yeah. I agree. I agree. And again, Vanya, we mentioned this before. The fact that this series decided to establish that Seven had never met Picard before, like, this show, also undermines the ability of a character we love, Seven, to care that much about Picard. Like, Raffi has 14 years because we just were told that, and Elnor has 13 years because we just were told that. But Seven could have had 18 years, and we were told they didn't.
I mean, but we did also make the argument that maybe Seven has more of a connection than a lot of people based on the fact that she was connected to him in some way when he was the cutest.
Yep, that's true.
So we can say that. I don't know if they're going to deal with this in season 2. I imagine, well, obviously they're going to deal with this in season 2, where the people that knew him before are going to meet him now again, like Riker and Troy and Guinan, who's going to be on the season 2 because they talked to Whoopi Goldberg about it. And they're going to be like, is that part of the process of season 2? Is that people are going to be like, you are real to me, you are the same Picard? But also what I thought about your discussion of what you were saying about Data and him having that discussion, it's kind of weird to say Data saying, my life is finite, you know what I mean? I want that finite. I want to know that I've had like that completion. But then they didn't do that with Picard.
Yeah, he wants to keep on going. In fact, he wanted a few more years than they gave him, it sounds
He
like.
didn't want the game to end.
Yep.
That's right. No, I agree with Vanya on that one. Totally.
So that's, to me, I guess a lot of season 2 will be like, people meet up with Picard, and then does he tell them or not that he's not exactly him? He's him. But
it'll be interesting to see when he meets up with Riker and Troy again. He'll seem like the same guy to Riker, but Troy will not be able to read him.
Yeah.
That'll be weird.
Will that change things for her?
How do you think she won't be able to read him? What do you think?
Well, he couldn't, because Troy couldn't read anything from Soji.
They can't be read.
Yes. Okay.
Which again goes back to that weird question of, if you don't have feelings to be empathically felt, does that mean you have thoughts that can be sent via mind meld? Again, that's a weird situation. But Spock mind melded with a satellite. So like we've had people mind meld with robots before.
You got suspended a little bit. But what's Troy's daughter's name again?
Kestra.
Troy's daughter. What's that young girl's name?
The actor or the character? The character's named Kestra.
Character. I forget.
Kestra.
But Kestra, right? Couldn't she read Soji, or couldn't she? I think somehow, being an empath or half or eighth empath, I think she could appreciate what Soji was feeling, and I think she could read her.
That might have just been empathy, though.
I think that was just empathy, like listening. Like I feel like I think she's probably partly empathic, but just like the way Troy dealt with Soji too, she understood her. She was able to analyze her without being able to feel her feelings, But she analyzed everything that she was feeling when she, smacked Picard on the wrist.
Yep.
Right. But now the danger with giving a Picard a bulletproof body, as we call it, is that what about the limitations of being, an 80-year-old actor? Like, how do you show that on screen? Can he now run faster? Is he the Bionic Man?
He doesn't
punch
have
people and fight like a 26-year-old? I mean.
No, I think Vanya's trying to say that there was a moment during the "let's debrief you about your new body" scene where they described that he has no strange powers, no abilities he didn't have before. I mean, he does have the ability to be an AI, which makes him downloadable. Like, there are things he can do by virtue of being an AI, but I don't think they specifically gave him a more powerful body. It might be slightly sturdier. I mean, he no longer has a heart made out of different things than the rest of him. He's all made out of whatever this was. So that's something that makes him better.
Do you think it was purely a device just to get rid of his erometic syndrome? Do you
No.
think it was purely, that entire thing was like, okay, let's get rid of this erometic syndrome thing.
No.
Let's just give him a new body.
I don't think it was a plot move. I think it was a thematic moment to make us see the title character as the kind of creature that had been othered by Starfleet. If Picard...
If you really think about it, it's kind of brilliant.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to do this thing. Everybody's freaking out, but how does it make you feel? Or when you question Data, or when you question Soji, or, Daj, or, for feeling things, or having desires, and we say, is that really real? Are they really feeling it? How does it feel like when you watch a character that you love and know?
Yeah.
As that same thing.
That is pretty brave. And thematically, it's very interesting how it actually circles back to him being Locutus, right? Him being part synthetic at one point. In a sense, he's sort of there again in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's why I wonder what, in season 2, when he meets up with Guinan, who has a very complicated relationship with the Borg, and he's synthetic, how will she feel?
Right.
Now, I feel like this season and this episode leaves us with some interesting questions. And I'd like to see if you guys got something from this that I didn't pick up. What happened to Narek? He just vanishes. And why did we wait 10 hours to hear that he was some kind of Zhat Vash washout? None of that seemed clear to me. Also, what happened to Sutra? Did she die? I'm curious what you guys think happened to either of those two characters that were there when they were necessary and then conveniently disabled or disappeared. Vanya?
Yeah.
I was really frustrated about that whole point. To them together, actually. The two people that you're talking about, they had a connection together where they did something by choice together, and then they were separated for a time, and then they just kind of went poof. They were just used as kind of to push something along, and then no one even noticed them disappearing.
Yeah.
Also, I felt like Sutra should have known that he might have tried to come back and do something that she didn't want to do. That didn't really make sense that she would let him go. I understand what she was trying to do, but letting him go doesn't really...
No, if she wanted to accomplish this, she could have allowed him to take out her sister, and then she could just kill him. That would be a way safer choice.
It's way safer, because then he came back and he almost...
He did stop her.
He almost accomplished what he wanted to accomplish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it got her in trouble, too.
Powys, what did you think about Narek and Sutra kind of vanishing conveniently?
You know what I think? I think it could have been a situation of oh shit, we have too many characters. I don't know what to do with them. Who's the bad guy? Oh yeah, it's the Romulans, and then the thing on the ship, and then you got the Romulan sister. You got to get rid of her with 7 of 9. Then you got the Romulan brother, and then you got this thing coming through a portal up in the sky, and then you got who else? You got, I think it's just a matter of the writer saying, okay, let's just turn off Sutra, and let the villains up there in space. Let's focus on that. And I think they just didn't know what to do with them. There were just too many characters.
Yeah, what did Seven just abandon all of the XBs? Because she's hanging out on the La Sirena now.
And okay, that's a whole another thing, right? The fact that I thought the exact same thing. What did she do with all those people that she cared about, the XBs? And then also, what, I don't know if you want to talk about a different time, but what's their whole mission? They all have, the same delta that they're wearing.
Yep.
So what's that whole thing? What's going on there?
Yeah, they've made some weird little brown coat fleet. It feels like this is basically Firefly again. This ragtag ship situation doesn't feel Star Trek-y. Yeah. It feels Firefly-y.
Yeah, because they're all a motley crew that just,
Yeah, it would be like watching Star Trek Maquis. And you're like, yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. That would have been a good show, actually.
Yeah, like I'd watch that, but
That might have been a better choice, in fact.
yeah, you know what?
Like, yeah.
Now that I mention it, not a bad idea.
Would you actually watch a show that didn't have the sort of Federation behind it? That didn't have the sort of the glitter and the gleam of the Federation and the holodeck and the resources of a.
I would, but it would have to involve the Federation consistently, and that's one thing I like about the Maquis. The Maquis would be a bunch of people who are either terrorists or freedom fighters, depending on your point of view, and then they would also be like washed out Starfleet grads and people who didn't, but like it would be an interesting group of people, and they're riding around in crummy Federation vessels, generally speaking. So
a bunch of anti-heroes, basically.
Yeah, a bunch of anti-heroes that are running away from the people who are usually the good guys. That would be interesting.
I like it.
All right, there's my pitch for another Star Trek series, gang.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That just came out of nowhere.
Star Trek Maquis. Okay.
Yeah. All right, guys. So now I want to talk about whether this episode and season was Star Trek. Let's trek this or wreck this. Poise, did this episode and did this season feel like Star Trek? With Picard, all the Picard maneuvers and make it so's, did that Star Trek it up for you?
The little sort of sprinklings of stuff, I think, sort of trekked it. Sure, sort of a half-hearted trekked it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was enough there that sort of harkened back to Star Trek of old. And I think they were smart enough to put certain, like, for example, a Picard maneuver, for example, is a good one. I made a note of that. I forgot, how did Allison even remember that? Whatever her name is.
No explanation. No explanation for why she knows about Make It So or why she knows about the Picard maneuver. She's very smart. Yeah, she's very smart, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But I'm tuned in for season 2. Right, I want to see what happens. I want to see Lore show up. I want to see Soji's story continue. I would say trekked it.
Okay.
Did I think it was spectacular? No, I didn't. I didn't think the season was spectacular. I would give it, if I had to rank it out of 10, I would give it a 6.5.
Okay. How about you, Vanya? Did this episode trek it, and then did this season trek it?
I would say that this episode trekked it. Yes. And there are many elements of this episode that I actually loved. It's so hard, it's so strange when you really love aspects of the episode, but you still can't love the whole episode.
Yeah.
And then that's when I feel like it's really working on my, like, nostalgia more than anything else. When I can't just totally say that I love the episode, but I just, took away these specific elements. I would say that the tie-in to the entire season with the end, with the finale, was done actually quite well, like as far as the themes throughout the whole entire series. So I would say the series trekked it also because of the through line of, humanity and sacrifice and the tying together, Picard as a synth, with the show. But the problem is for me is that I didn't know if this was going to be one storyline about the synth band, or how that was going to, if that was going to carry on to the next season. I didn't know if it was just going to be, this is, season 1 of Picard, and it's going to be the synth story, and it'd be something else. But now we know that he's a synth. It changes some things.
Yeah, it does make every story fundamentally a synth story, which is interesting, and it's certainly fertile ground if that's where they decide to sow the seeds. So sure. I'm curious what the next season is going to do for us, especially since they've got a different showrunner. But Chabon is still writing the first 2 episodes of season 2, so he's involved. He's just not showrunning.
Let me ask you something.
Hold on, before you do, Poise, let's finish up the Trekkets and Wreckets, because I want to say that this episode threw so much fan service at me, and yet that one scene between the AI of Picard talking to the AI of Data is the piece of, I guess, fan service that made this episode Trek It for me.
Exactly, yeah.
And the theme of this entire season of bringing a person into the fold and making you examine a character you love now that they are the thing that is hated. That to me is a brilliant Star Trek choice.
Yeah,
So
I
agree.
I do think that fundamentally Star Trek is incompatible with peak TV because this like dark gritty bullshit doesn't work for Star Trek. It's a bit like a dark gritty Superman movie. That's a terrible idea, and
Right.
every attempt at it is going to fail. You do a bright version of Star Trek. You give us the hope that Star Trek represents, and you've got yourself something that's going to feel like Star Trek right out of the gate. But they treat this as a 10-hour movie, and they deliver it to us as a TV show. And I think this is a mistake.
Right, I agree. I feel like if they could make that choice,
Yeah.
if they could
Can
really...
I say something?
Oh yeah, Poise, go ahead.
Which is exactly why we were speaking about Q, I think, a couple episodes ago, and it would be great to see Q again. But because of how dark and gritty this show is, that is precisely why Q does not work for Star Trek Picard.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had Q show up in Battlestar Galactica with like a mariachi band and a donkey and with a dama. It just wouldn't work. Because this show is going for more of a science fiction vibe and less science fantasy. Q is science fantasy, if you had to call him something.
Yeah.
And he doesn't fit. He wouldn't fit in Battlestar Galactica. It would just destroy the illusion of the show.
Well, and just look at the attempt in Star Trek Picard to go a little bit wacky when they dressed up some characters in some funny outfits and gave people wacky accents and behaviors, and
work.
how it absolutely didn't work. I mean, Rios was fun, but we didn't even know him well enough to establish how fun it is. I actually kind of want to go back and watch that again, just to enjoy Rios. But
That's right.
everything Patrick Stewart did in that was, like, unquestionably not this series, but might have totally worked in TNG.
Yeah, I think it would have
Do
worked
you know what?
for sure. Like as a
Sorry, go ahead.
kind of like a Monster of the Week like episode. Yeah, that would have been worked, and especially over 23 episodes. Once a week that aren't necessarily tied together. Then I think it can work. I will say that in this episode, we've been waiting for Picard to be kind of like sound more like Picard and be more, like that compassionate kind of person who also has an ego simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the most like that in this episode. So we kind of had to wait to the finale for that to happen.
Yeah, it's weird. It feels a bit like when you watch Star Trek Insurrection, and there are dark, scary moments where the Starfleet admiral is a bastard, or a two-parter where you're dealing with who's infiltrated the Federation on Deep Space Nine. Like, there are some great episodes that allow you to ask that question, and at the end of 2 hours, you get to an answer, and that feels like a movie. And it is weird to do it in 10 hours. Is it bad? Yeah, I guess it's kind of bad. If they were doing this super crazy well in 10 hours or 13 hours, Discovery did the same thing. There's this uplifting, beautiful ending to Discovery's first season, but it takes you 12 hours of trudging through the muck to get there. And that's not Star Trek.
It's weird. They're trying to hold on to the idea that they're a weekly show and then squeeze it into this new format. I really just wish they would do like layer it more, like do the one through line, but have like Monster of the Week like episodes, and then have like big episodes like that are about the through line. You know what I mean? Because I feel like that would lend to this whole process better.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why it was always interesting when we compared Star Trek Discovery to the Orville, because they had about the same number of episodes, they were coming out weekly, and one of them was giving us little nuggets of a storyline that eventually would turn into a big two-parter. and the other one tried to keep us every week with a cliffhanger. And one of those things works with the Star Trek ethos, and one of those just doesn't feel right.
There's also the point of the reconciliation with Raffi that we've been sort of craving for a while. I felt that what would have made that episode supremely better is if Raffi was on board the ship with Picard and not Agnes. It doesn't make any sense for Agnes to be on that ship.
Yeah.
Raffi would have known about the Picard maneuver. Raffi would have known about his history, right? They could have bonded. They could have had a conversation on board that ship. You know, that would have completely sort of, you know, given us the sort of closure we wanted between these two. It doesn't make any sense for Agnes to be on that bridge.
Yeah, Vanya?
That makes so much sense, Powys, because then also when he's having a whole brain breakdown, Raffi can fly the ship. You know,
Yes.
he would know how to do it. So when Riker went away, and he was like, okay, bye, and worked away, I was like, but what if Picard can't do anything anymore because it's like about spatial awareness?
Yeah.
You know, the parietal lobe and everything. It's about sensory things. And then Agnes, who knows nothing about how to fly a ship, is stuck there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I gotta say, I'd be surprised if there isn't a draft of this episode where that is whether that's Raffi in there. Like, that would make so much more sense. But if you need her somewhere else for some other thing, and you need Agnes there for some reason, I don't know.
I just feel like I don't know why this connection with Agnes and Picard is being made when Raffi already has like this connection as being his right hand man. You know, in the Picard that we haven't been able to see in these years. Yet they're separated quite a bit.
Well, this entire season, I think, has done a lot of characters dirty. We spend 3 episodes getting to know these lovely Tal Shiar Romulans on Chateau Picard, and then we never hear from them again. The time spent with those characters could have been spent developing somebody else that we could have been hanging on to. And I feel like this show has squandered certain things, and maybe that's why I was worried about a scene with a soccer ball not paying off, because those Romulans never are heard from again after Chateau Picard. They're just picking grapes. And I feel like the showrunners, again, in this tug of war of who's in charge of the show, okay, now Michael Chabon's in charge of the show, wound up not teeing up a show that they delivered at the end. And, you know, that happened with the first season of Discovery. The second season of Discovery did it again where they lost showrunners and sort of wobbled a bit before they got to the end. I feel like these shows need some consistent leadership from beginning to end, even if it's bad, just so it's consistent.
And can I say that I feel like Star Trek, so much of it is about, like, that team, building that team and being, like, familiar with that team and it being really tight. And we never, and because the shows are much shorter, we don't have that time. And because they're about this one big arc, everybody has their roles that they kind of have to play, and we don't get to spend any time knowing, really truly getting to know these characters, and it's kind of artificial that we're supposed to feel stuff. The same thing happened with Discovery. Like, now we can go back and be like, yeah, I love Tilly, she's really cute, and you know what I mean, she's really smart, and we know her right now. But like, it could have happened so much quicker if they had rolled it out differently.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna revise my statement. This episode trekked it, this season wrecked it.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Sir.
This season of television failed to be Star Trek. I keep trying to give it a pass by saying, it's peak TV. No, you done fucked it up. This is not how Star Trek is done. You have failed to make Star Trek. You put a bunch of Star Trek people on screen, but the thing you made is not Star Trek. Basta.
Oh my lord.
I'm saying it.
He took the gloves off, man.
Yeah.
Well, also I would say, I always have to come back to Raffi too at some point. I did feel like she had some moments of, like, where people kind of are like, yeah, she's really smart. smart, and she's really great, and she's so there for everybody. You know, she's actually one of the characters that is so consistently loyal and has your back. You know, without question. Where you're not like, is she gonna be okay with this? You know what I mean? She just is there. And what do you think Picard was gonna say to her when he said, "You're quite right. I thought about everything. That's what I."
Yeah. I'm consistently incorrect. I can't believe you're still around me. Yeah.
You know, when he said that, did you think that's what he was going to say?
Yeah.
You're quite right about all things, like over 14 years, and I abandoned you, and
all good things.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. You know, I feel lighter now that I've wrecked the season. I feel better.
You've been burdened yourself.
Yeah, I've laid down my burdens. I feel
now
my back.
You can go into the west.
Exactly. Now, one interesting thing that's going on in Toronto right now is post-production on Star Trek Discovery is kind of at a snail's pace. The place, Technicolor, is down the street from here, and they're closed. I know because I have a show currently there that's not being finished. So, yeah. So Discovery doesn't have a release date as of the time that we're recording this. They've shot it. They're just taking their time with visual effects and all of the things that need a bunch of people in a room to do work together. So this is it for Trek It or Wreck It for now, but sooner or later, they're going to finish all 13 episodes of Discovery and release that season. So I'm looking forward to Trek It or Wreck It coming back and hopefully quarantine being over. Because, guys, as much as it's nice to have, you know, you here, you're not here, and I miss you. So
it's weird to talk to just your voice and not see you or any of your reactions. It's awkward.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, as I shoot this show, to give the camera the best view, I just look at the back of iPads. So I know where you should be, and I look at you. It's got to be a bit like being on a holodeck with a surly admiral.
Right.
Yeah.
But Discovery did have that promo.
Yes.
Recently.
Yeah, new promo that still says coming soon, and it's like they know it's going to be soon, but we don't know what soon means yet. So I guess everybody, this is goodbye, or this is adieu for now. And we are very much looking forward to seeing if Star Trek Discovery, jumping 1,000 years into the future, gives us a chance to be Star Trek. With all of the shackles of canon removed, I wonder what they're going to make. I really do. Poyce, are you excited for season 3?
I am, sir. I am. I think it's going to get better. I really do. I think they're going to get into a groove, and it's going to be better. Well, definitely better than season 1. I know that. But I think they've listened to some of the criticisms, and I think they're actually going to make a better show.
How about you, Vanya?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I feel good about it because we know all the characters now, the players, and if they don't mess with that too much and don't add a bunch of people we don't care about, you know, then maybe, you know, it could be awesome.
Could be. All right, I like this optimism, guys. That's what Star Trek is all about. So, with that, we will see you guys again soon. We're looking forward to seeing what the comments are like. We can keep the comments on this alive for quite a while, and we can do it all while social distancing. How responsible of us. And so hopefully, keep your hands clean, and hopefully by the time season 3 of Discovery comes out, this quarantine thing might even be over. And we'll see you guys then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.